This session and all the sessions are being recorded and they will be made available to you after each session. As you will see, the team email address is on the bottom left hand of the slide just now. Please email us if you have any difficulties or further questions or further support that is maybe needed. As I said, we love interacting with you during these live sessions, so please use the chat pane as people are doing just now to introduce themselves, but use it to ask any questions or share any observations or comments, provide some feedback. We also love hearing from you beyond the sessions too, so please use that contact email there that's on the slide just now to get in touch with us if there's anything that you want to ask between now and the next session. And please don't apologise for being late. It's great that you can join us, Samantha. Delighted to share the session with you. So this is what we're hoping to cover in tonight's session. And as mentioned at the beginning, the focus is Subatising. What we hope to do is share with you why this is such an important concept for learners. We also want to provide some practical ideas that might help you develop this a little bit further. Most importantly, what we want to do is use this series of webinars for you to ask some questions, for you to share your experiences with us and truly collaborate. We know how valuable your time is. We want to make sure that the time that we spend together is beneficial for you, but also for the children and the adults that you work with. So please use this opportunity to network, use it to learn from and with each other, and share some of the thinking that you take away from this session and any other sessions that you attend, and share that back at your own establishments as well. We would love to hear how you take some of the ideas and how this challenges or, some of your thinking and how you share that back at your own establishments. So we're going to start off with a bit of a warm-up. The last time, if you joined us in session 1, we were talking all things Scots because it happened to be on Burns Day. But today we're just going to use a little would you rather activity. So we're going to pause for a moment, let you think about it. And again, if you can share your responses in the chat, that would be ideal. So would you rather either travel the world with all expenses paid for one whole year, or would you rather have £40,000 to spend on whatever you want? And that might include some travel, but again, you've got a bit of flexibility there. So I'm going to stop just now and please share what you're thinking. Travel around the world or have £40,000? Travel around the world. Yep, that seems to be a popular one so far. All expenses paid. Some people preferring the money. I probably would too. Travel, yes, absolutely. And we're at that time of the year where we're beginning to think about our travels for this year, so that would come in very, very handy. Both very tempting indeed. Can we not just have both? That would be good. Great. Oh, yep, we want the cash. Thank you very much. It's getting close to payday, so yes, that money would come in extremely handy and have that flexibility. Yep. That's interesting. Never been out of the country, but there is so much to see and love about our own country, so I do understand that too. Travel seems to be quite popular. Wouldn't get the time off work, indeed. So we'll move on, but that idea, we've used this would you rather in a very general sense tonight, but actually the notion of would you rather is a really good starter activity for your learners. You can easily link it to the different things that you're maybe learning with the children in your own establishments. It can be a really good way of finding out what people are thinking, as I have discovered just watching your chat tonight, so that's really good. Thanks, Yvonne. So before we get started on the formal part of tonight's session, we wanted to do a wee bit of a check-in, and we'll do this each time. We want to reflect a wee bit on the last session when we provided an overview of counting. We also highlighted the importance of counting. We also shared with you during the last session what effective counting looks like. We considered how our everyday activities and tasks can provide great opportunities to develop the thinking and understanding. So, would anyone like to post in the chat, or please put your hand up if you want to, and come in and share anything with us in terms of the last session and what's been happening since that last session and session 2, which is tonight. Any successes or challenges that you would like to note? So please just come in or post in the chat. Did you perhaps share some of the thinking back at your own establishments and how did that go? Did you try out some of the suggested tasks on the takeaway grid with your own children? Great. I can see people saying here about that realisation that counting in French, yep, and how that made it really hit home about how difficult it is. Great. Oh, I love the idea of the counting stick and using it for forwards and backwards. Great. Great, and it's using those everyday opportunities when the kids are going to lunch. Yep. Great. And using books, yep, to really think about pulling out the numeracy and maths in there. That counting forwards and backwards seems to have been a big success, which is great. That's a strong point that we were hoping to get across last time. Oh, great. Some people using the counting stick for the first time. And yes, Yvonne loves her puppets. So yes, using those puppets for forward and backward counting. So that's great that you've been able to take some of the learning from the last session and really try it out with your own learners. And really, I suppose for us, it's about that. What are you noticing? What are your learners noticing? What are they wondering? And what are you wondering when you're engaging with your learners with that specific focus on aspects of counting? And it's about thinking about those light bulb moments. We have them all the time as adults, but we also see that quite often with our learners, particularly when we are focusing in on a special aspect of counting. So thinking about what the learners did, what they said, and think about that between this session and the next session too, because we love to hear from you. We love to see how some of the ideas that we've presented to you have had some impact for you, for your staff, and indeed for your learners, which is great. Great. Thank you so much for all these ideas in the chat. That's great. So I'm just going to share my my screen just now. So Yvonne, I'll just share just now. And what we want to do is just remind you just now, Yvonne, can you come in and just let me know that you can see the Padlet?
Yes, I can
Thank
see
you.
that, yeah.
Thank you, Yvonne. So if you attended the last session, you will know this already. But what we're trying to do is we're trying to hold all of the information that's shared with you in one place, and that just makes life a lot easier for you. So what you'll see is the recording of session 1 is highlighted here. And we will upload session 2 when we have that from Ian. We also have the presentation itself on the Padlet, and that way allows you to go back and revisit some of the messaging, especially if you're sharing it with your team. But we also have some of the national guidance here as well. So we've got the experiences and outcomes, we've got the Making Maths Count report, the Being Me, Realising the Ambition document, all the things that we think is quite relevant for you to have in one place. We've also got here some links that we'll share with you, and we will continue to add to that as we go through each session. So we've got the Math Through story, we've got the BookBug website there, and these are just links that we find really useful as a team, and we hope that you'll find it useful to have all of those shared and stored in one place. So we will share the slides with you, and we will share the recording with you just as soon as we finish this session, and we'll continue to add to that in terms of session 3, 4 and 5. So by the end of this session and this whole series of webinars, you should have quite a meaty Padlet that you can then revisit and also share back at your own establishments. But it's good to check in every now and again, depending on what you're about to teach with your learners. So I'll just stop sharing just now, and Yvonne will bring the presentation back up. So hopefully that's been helpful, and as I say, you will get a copy of the slides later. So in terms of Curriculum for Excellence, and we might just post, sorry, just before I speak about this one, we might just want to post a link to the Padlet. I can do that just now. And we'll post it in again later on too, just so that you've got a copy of the link for the Padlet that I just shared there for you. So I'll just post that into the chat just now. And again, we can do that later on too. Great stuff, thank you. Great, I can see somebody shared that, so that's smashing, thank you very much. So in terms of Curriculum for Excellence, where does Subatising sit in our national guidance? So this is what you'll see highlighted on the slide just now, is where Subatising is explicitly mentioned in the national guidance, so Curriculum for Excellence, experiences and outcomes and benchmarks. And as you know, and you can see in the slide, there's actually not an awful lot of reference to Subatising, given that it's so crucial, and that's what we hope to share with you tonight, just how important it is. You can see that the number and number processes section is obviously very busy. There's so much to cover, and we know and appreciate that the foundational knowledge and understanding gained at early level really does pave the way for the learning that's to come later on. What we don't want is for the focus on Subatising to be overlooked, because it's actually not mentioned that much. So we're hoping to really unpick that tonight and really show you ways that you can make sure the learning in Subatising is explicit. And on the next slide, what we're saying is we really need to hone in on the skills of Subatising and those benchmarks at early level. You'll see there I mentioned to estimating, and any opportunity I can get, I talk about estimating, so this won't be a surprise for the people who I work closely with. Estimating is such a crucial skill to develop. There should be lots of opportunities to develop this. All too often, and think here about learners that you support, but in my experience, all too often learners focus on the correct answer. They focus on the calculation itself. They don't often understand why the process is important. What they prefer to do is just give you the answer. They want to find the exact answer because sometimes estimating seems like it's extra work. Developmentally, estimating is quite challenging for learners, but it really is a higher level skill that requires learners to be able to conceptualise and mentally manipulate numbers. But instead of just focusing on the actual calculation, what learners are doing when they're estimating is they're analysing each number in the problem or the question or the calculation. They're determining what the solution might be. They're showing a deeper understanding. So what we hope is that you try and weave in the skill of estimating regularly. The main focus for tonight's session will be on the second point on the slide just now. You'll see on the slide it specifically mentions the identification of how many. What Yvonne and I will be talking through is how the how many element of it is really the end point of developing Subatising. What we'll focus on tonight is those everyday objects, those everyday opportunities, those patterns, those irregular patterns that you might want to share with your learners to develop that skill of Subatising, as well as focus on the dot patterns, the dice, the dominoes and the 10 frames. So we're hoping that we manage to open up the idea of Subatising tonight. So again, over to you. We would like to invite you to either, again, come in and come off camera if you want and put your hand up, take time to think about it just on your own if that's easier, or to share your thinking in the chat as you have done already. And the question that I want you to think about is the question that's on the slide just now. How is Subatising different from counting? And I'm going to stop and pause to let you have time to digest that and reflect on that question. How is Subatising different to counting? And I'm just going to pause to let you think about it. Yep. Thanks, Kirsty. Yep. Indeed.
I've got a hand up there, Maria, as well.
See that? Please come in. I can see there's a hand up just now. Is it Eunice? Eunice, would you like to come in and share your thoughts with us? I don't know if it was maybe just trying out the different functions, but please, Eunice, feel free to come in or indeed post your thoughts in the chat.
Can you hear me okay?
Yes, Eunice, I can hear you perfectly well. Thank you for coming in.
I've unmuted it. I've put my hand up because it won't let me see the chat at all. It's just buffering around. I've actually temporarily left and came back in again, but it's still doing the same thing. So
that's a pity, Eunice.
Yeah, we'll see if I can just work away and try and get the chat up.
Okay.
Thank you.
Sorry about that.
No, it's okay. Thank you.
Oh, there's somebody else with her hand up now as well. Is it Dawn? Dawn, would you like to come in?
Hi, yes, I'm the same. I've got no chat. It's just buffering.
I wonder if that's something from your own. There's lots of people here typing in the chat, so I'm assuming it's okay for most people.
It was
That's...
working and it stopped for about 5 minutes now.
Oh, did it? And did you try, Dawn, to leave and rejoin? I don't think that
No,
worked for
I'll
Eunice, but yeah, it might
I'll
be
maybe
worth a
try
try.
that. Thank you.
Apologies. And there are so many people on the call tonight as well that it's maybe just a bit of a glitch. But hopefully most people, and I can see lots of great comments coming through the chat just now. So Subatising...
Oh, sorry, I was just going to say I had a wee bit issue with mine, but I just kept on clicking on the chat and it eventually loaded. I
good.
just kept on redoing it just if others might just need to keep on persevering with it and it might
Yeah.
eventually come.
It's maybe just buffering because the chat is going so quickly just now, and it's maybe just taking your device a wee bit of a time to sort of catch up. So yes, please do persevere and let me know in the chat if you're able to get it to catch up. So we'll move on just now, but just to say lots of great ideas coming through the chat there, which is amazing. So Subatising is a fundamental number skill. It helps children gain that real deep understanding of quantity. And without a deep understanding of quantity, children are left with no option but to count everything when they start facing calculations or equations. When we count, we're always focused on that last item in the set, but we can often miss that bigger picture. So just before everyone's moved on, but just before we talk about the Subatising meaning, think about asking, or at a time when you have asked your learners how many there are in a group. Say there are 5 objects and you're asking how many. Think about all the understanding and the steps and the knowledge that the children need to be able to process in order to answer that effectively. We mentioned in the last session how complicated the process of counting is, so they need to be able to match one number name to one object. So that's one-to-one correspondence. They need to demonstrate how many are in the group. They can count, the last number. They need to be able to start counting from any starting point in any arrangement and know that that doesn't affect the total number in the group. They need to understand that they can count different things and that those objects could be things they can touch or things that they can't touch. So in terms of cognitive load, that's a whole load of stuff that our young learners need to hold. And what we need to do is try and provide ways that we can reduce that cognitive load, and being able to Subatise and Subatise effectively can really support that. Subatising and counting are linked, we know that, and it's about making sure our children have got experience and can demonstrate understanding in both. So just moving on to what Subatising is, in its very simplest form, Subatising is being able to visualise, to see a number of objects instantly without that needing to count them one at a time. In its literal translation from Latin, it means to arrive suddenly or quickly recognise. And there are lots of ways to support and develop understanding. Sometimes this is actioned through the use of dice, and you'll see some of the ideas on the slide just now. We could use dice or dot patterns, dominoes, finger patterns, and we're going to talk about all of these a wee bit later on in the session. The thing to remember is when taught effectively, Subatising can really begin to develop that flexibility with numbers. It really allows our learners to manipulate numbers to suit and support whatever they've been asked. So for example, if they've been asked to solve 8 and 5, and it might not be in a formal way, it might be 8 objects and 5 objects, we want them to have that understanding that they can partition the 5 into a 2 and a 3, because that makes that calculation easier. So they can do 8 and 2 more and then add on the remaining 3. It's a real important precursor for more complex number concepts and ideas. It can support addition and subtraction, for example. It can allow learners to see patterns in numbers, can really help develop crucial number sense, which we know is so important. On the next slide, we'll talk a little bit just now, but we'll go on at great length about this a wee bit later on. There are 2 sort of stages, if you like, or 2 types of Subatising. The first one is known as perceptual Subatising. So we are born with the ability to perceptually Subatise small amounts. It's the ability to just see and say that there are 3, for example. So we are directly perceiving the total as a single unit of 3. The ability to Subatise, as I said, is inherent. Even young learners are able to show 3 fingers, for example, if they're presented with a pattern of 3. What we need to do is develop this further by ensuring children can then make that connection between the number they see and say and the number word and the symbol for that particular number. Being able to perceptually subitise and to effectively recognise a numerosity can be done without using any other mathematical processes. It's a really important component of early numeracy. So it really is that say what you see. I'm sounding a wee bit like a chat show host here. I think it's catchphrase, just say what you see. But it is that idea of them not having to rely on any other mathematical skills. So it really does reduce that cognitive load. Conceptual subitising builds on this skill. So conceptual subitising is when we break up the numbers that can be perceptually subitised and use our knowledge of numbers to combine and then work out the total. Conceptual subitising can be used to teach number facts, as the way numbers combine can be different, and this can lead to making connections between number facts. So for example, they might see a 5 as a 3 and a 2. They might see it as a 4 and a 1, and we could go on, but I'm hoping you get the idea. To be able to subitise conceptually involves learners having effective strategies. They need to be able to recognise smaller values within larger ones, so a wee bit like a subset. They also need to then know what to do with those subsets to find the larger total. So again, just to give an example of that, when a child is confronted, for example, by 2 dice, one showing 3 and another showing 4, each is perceptually subitised before the sense of 7 can emerge. And we'll talk through a lot of this and provide examples of all of this a wee bit later on. On the next slide, we'll explain to you in this slide that even very young children can recognise the number of things without counting. Young children also have powerful visual memories, and some may find it easier to remember images more than words. 3-year-olds can recognise 3 things. They might not be able to say the word yet, but they certainly can recognise the 3. Subitising can help children to build images for numbers, to visualise and to learn number facts. Subitising helps children to see, to solve and to manipulate numbers in their head. This develops their number sense and helps them master some key calculation strategies at an early stage. Perceptual subitising involves that instant recognition. But like a lot of education, it is widely debated what the total number that we can perceptually subitise is. Some fields of research would say it is 5. Other fields of research would suggest that children can only subitise perceptually to 4. And some research also says that children can perceptually subitise up to 6, but only if it is shown in a familiar arrangement like a domino or a dot pattern or dice pattern. Regardless of all of that, and we don't want to get too dragged into that, we want to make sure that we are ensuring children have rich and varied subitising opportunities, and that's what tonight is all about. Dice patterns, as useful as they are, don't teach subitising completely. Subitising is more than just recognising regular dice patterns. Although it is important that children are supported to instantly recognise more regular patterns such as the patterns like dice, we want to make sure that we're using a range of visuals. And what's really important is that we provide plenty of opportunities for children to see and say what they see. And this could be in regular but also irregular patterns. So we might want to think about introducing some random irregular patterns, as this can really tell us what they understand and what they don't understand. So it's both regular and irregular patterns that we would be promoting here. If we're thinking that we might want to start with regular patterns, the games that we can play with learners that involve dice provide that repeated experience of interpreting those regular dot patterns. So lots of board games would be really useful for this. Okay, again, we're going to pause at this point, and what we would like you to do using this visual is just to type into the chat what you notice. And I'm going to stop there to allow you to look at the image and don't overthink it, just pop into the chat what you notice. Great. Great. Thank you to everybody who's, and as you'll see, very different, some very different answers coming into the chat, some focusing on the amount that they see, some more focused on the shape, some are saying that both images are the same, a big focus on the pattern there as well. So again, the reason that we put this one in here is really to highlight to you the importance of noticing. If we presented something like this to our learners or to our peers, as we have with you tonight, some will talk about the amount and they'll start to think about the patterns and the different numbers that they see within that. Others will just talk about what they see in terms of they might see a gate, they might see silver circles, they might see some sort of pattern, and lots of you are talking about the pattern in the chat pane just now. Do we see the diamond shape? Do we see a square at all? I wonder what those buttons are. Are those buttons for something? Do they do something? And again, the reason we put this one in here is because Subatising starts with noticing, and we really need to make sure that we are focusing on the noticing first. So when we're working with the children, it's about, as always, following the interest of the children, asking them, what do you see? And really listening without our own agenda, which is difficult. I find that quite difficult. But what we're saying here, it's really important to maybe not put the maths and the numbers first, but to really focus on the noticing. We need the children to be free to tell us what they're thinking in their heads and in their minds, instead of them trying to tell us what's in our heads. So if we think about the image there that you'll see on the top left with the buttons, we'll take that as an example. If we ask the children what they notice, they might talk about they can see buttons, and they'll just see buttons. They might not give us any number, they might not tell us how many, and that's okay. Let them go through all those possibilities with the buttons first and exhaust all of that with the children, and then we can start to model, we can start to question, and we can start to deepen their understanding. So I would be modelling that by pointing maybe to one button and saying out loud, I see a button, I see one button. Again, I might repeat that. For 2, I see 2 buttons, and I might draw around that as I have done on the slide to indicate that you're seeing them as one group of 2. Where possible, and we'll talk about this in a minute or two, try to use the same size, the same colour, and the same shape of objects to begin with. And again, we'll unpick that a wee bit later on. So again, when you point to the buttons, the children might notice the colour, they might notice the texture, they might notice the patterns. Did they notice the holes? They might want to think about which buttons have the same amount of holes. They don't need to notice how many holes or indeed how many buttons, just that some of the buttons have the same holes, some might have more or less than others. When they're thinking about the group of buttons, they might see a group of 2, they might see a group of 4, and they may demonstrate this by using their fingers. There's actually so much to notice when we start to unpick that, but we need to ask those questions and allow the learners to exhaust all those possibilities of what they notice. The children are actually much better at it than us as adults. Again, using the animals over in the right-hand side, what do you see? They may see animals. They may want to talk about the shape, the colour, the size, the pattern. Again, we might want to model some of that, and we might want to say how many eventually after we've exhausted all those possibilities. And even then the learners might say, I see 2, or some of them might say, I see a 1, and a 1. So what we would be asking for you to do is just look for opportunities. Look for things when you are interacting with your learners. It might be when you're outdoors, it might be when you're out walking, it might be when you're reading with them, so using the images in the books. You might want to use patterns and material, any possibilities, and there are so many possibilities. Yvonne and I, when we were talking earlier on, said when you start seeing things in this way, you can't help but unsee, you can't help but unnotice, and I'm actually seeing Subatising everywhere just now because I've been so focused on this session for tonight, and your learners will become very, very good at noticing too. Snack time, another great opportunity to develop understanding related to Subatising. On the next slide, we're almost at the time of year, so I think it's the 20th of March officially when we are in spring. But we're almost there just now when the weather changes and new life begins to emerge, and this really gives a perfect opportunity to talk about some of the learning associated with Subatising. So taking some of that learning outdoors. Look at all the opportunities that you can see on the slide just now for noticing. All the different colours, the shapes, the patterns. There's actually so much to notice. And again, it's about asking your learners what they see, what they notice, and we use a lot in our sessions, what do you notice and what do you wonder? But really using those types of questions to promote and deepen the understanding. And eventually, and again, you'll know your learners, but when you think it's right, you can use these situations or similar situations and lead the children to develop their understanding. And you can do that through modelling, as I was explaining on the last slide. Some of the questions that we ask can help develop that understanding. And again, scaffolding it so that we can encourage all learners to eventually consider how many, but that's not the first thing we do. We exhaust all that noticing first. Hopefully that's made some sense to you in terms of how to introduce Subatising and using those everyday or those seasonal opportunities to ask your learners what they see and how they see them. I'm going to pass to Yvonne just now, who's going to develop some of this thinking a wee bit more. So I'll pass over to you, Yvonne, if that's okay.
Thank you very much. So if I was to show you this image quickly and asked you, what did you see? I'll give you a minute to type into the chat and tell me, what did you see? And I know it was very quick, but it was quick on purpose. Okay, lots of people saying that they saw some pigs, they saw pink toys, they saw pink, they saw 5 dog toys, some were made of cord. So you can see loads of different things that people noticed from that. And you were right. So there was a group of toys. If I was to do the same and say to you, what did you see there? I'll give you a minute to type into the chat. So you can see there a lot of people being able to see that they saw 6 tennis balls. And that's where sometimes we need to think about what we're using to Subatise with children and thinking about what we call the cognitive load. So when I showed you this picture of the pigs, your brain had lots of things to think about. It was thinking about, oh, what colour is it? Oh, are they pigs? Oh, are they dog toys? Oh, are they all the same? What are they made of? Lots and lots of different things that were kind of whirring through people's heads before they were getting to the point of just being able to see how many objects there were. Whereas when I showed you the second picture where everything was the same colour, they were all the same shape, and they were all the same size, you can see how many people were actually just focusing in on how many there was altogether. So I'll show you another example just to kind of help you see what I mean with this. So if I was to show you this and say, what did you see? And then was to show you this, hopefully you can see that actually in the second picture, it's easier to do that automatic Subatising where you're just looking and concentrating on how many there are. Whereas in this picture, because things are the different sizes, they're the different shapes, they're the different colours, there's much more to process before your brain gets to how many there were in total. And that's often why, if you give the likes of a Google search and put in Subatising, you will find that a lot of activities do focus on dot patterns. And that's because obviously round objects are easier to see. And the black dot is that kind of easier for children to be able to see and remember. And as Maria said, the regular dice patterns are not the be-all and end-all of Subatising, as we'll show you as we go through the session today, but they are very much an important part of Subatising. So I'm going to stop sharing just now, and I'm going to ask Maria, who is my pupil in this situation.
Be kind, Yvonne. It's a Monday.
Don't worry, there's no French in this one. So when we first start introducing children to regular patterns, it was just as Maria was talking about. It's not really focusing on the numbers or the numerical quantity. It really is just a discussion around, what do you see?
I see dots. They are black. I see dots the same size. So it's about just exhausting all of those possibilities. They're all equally spaced apart. They're on a card. It's white. The card is white with a black line round it, border around it. I see 4.
That's great. And so again, you're exposing children to these regular patterns. Now, if you've got board games available in your setting, they'll be seeing them there, but it's also thinking about where else might you have these patterns displayed and useful. We then want children to become familiar with seeing them in order, so they're recognising how it builds up.
3, 4, 5, 6.
And then children should be able to recognise them just in a random order when they're quickly shown.
I see 2. I see 5. I see 6.
The other thing that's really important is that it's not just a case of having these on cards. We don't want to be kind of pulling children out and just sitting on the carpet and that's not going to be giving them a kind of rich Subatising experience. We also want to be using domino patterns in a multi-sensory way. So, for example, I might ask the children to copy this in the air. So I'm going to show you a pattern, Maria, and I want you to copy it in the sky for me. Okay, I'm going to show you another one, and this time I want you to clap what pattern you see. Perfect. Now, one thing that Maria and I did notice today is that for some reason on Teams, you can't actually hear people clapping. So you'll have to just imagine that Maria did clap that one in time. So again, really important that it's about children seeing and hearing and being able to feel, well, what does 3 feel like? What does 4 feel like? And thinking about lots of opportunities that you can use to build these regular patterns into their everyday experiences. So we've got a couple of photographs here of just some of the ways that we have seen, and we know that, for example, in some settings they're used at the likes of sort of tidying up, where children park their scooters or their trikes, their bikes into the right parking spot, and the parking spot is labelled with one of the regular patterns. That might also be the same if they've got games or activities that they've been using. They know that that belongs back onto the corresponding shelf. We
Yvonne, Yvonne, I've not got the presentation of you.
Oh,
just so that you're sharing the image of the scooter and people can see how that links. Perfect, great, thank you.
So that's those 2 images there. We also know that people use these at the likes of snack time and things like that. So, it might be how much snack costs that day and they have to lay out the coins to match, or it might be if you've got the likes of self-service snack where children are actually using it as a guide for how many items they can take or how much of each, that kind of thing. So different ways that you can think about bringing these regular patterns to life, essentially, because we don't just want them to be on flashcards, we want them to be really embedded across the setting and, you know, familiar and used by the children in their everyday routines. We also spoke a little bit at the beginning about conceptual Subatising. So once a child is at the stage where they can look at a number, and as Maria said, up to 4, depending on whose theory you read, up to 5, possibly up to 6. But once they're getting that real perceptual Subatising where they can just look and know how many it is, then they're ready to start working on what we call conceptual Subatising. So this is a slightly harder level of skill. And this is where children are able to break down the amount that they see into smaller groups. So they are recognising that the total is combined by lots of different subgroups. And that's what we mean when we talk about conceptual Subatising. And it really builds on children's part-whole awareness because they're able to see parts of numbers making that whole. So when we talk about moving on to conceptual Subatising, these are really the 2 key questions that we want to be exploring with children. So what do you see? But also introducing how do you see it? So if I was using the likes of this, so I've dropped some on a plate. What do you see? How do you see it? Some children might say that they see a 2 and a 2 and a 1 and a 1. Other children might see this as 4 and 2. And some might be able to see it as 2, 2, 2. And there's lots of other ways. Some people might just see it as 1, 1, 1, 1. But essentially, this is the key questions that we are asking to help develop conceptual Subatising. What do you see and how do you see it? So I'm going to give you a moment just to type into the chat, and Maria said I should put a little hazard warning that these were prepared in advance and that no, we did not pay several £100s to get a wee tub of tomatoes. But what do you see and how do you see it? And again, for those of you that are not able to see the chat, we've got so many different answers. We've got some people seeing 5 and 5. We've got somebody making a comment around the fact of always starting here because it's like that reading direction. So they saw 2, 3, 1 and 4. Some people saying that they noticed tomatoes. And again, that goes back to what Maria was saying, that taking that time of noticing is important. Some people seeing 1 first of all. And this is where it's great when you're actually doing it with a physical objects because you can move it and actually they call it move it to prove it. So if children are saying, well, I see 2, you can physically move those items to show it in the groups that they can see, that you can move it around. It's also at this stage that we could begin to introduce irregular or random patterns, as we call it. And again, I'll put my camera back on, and my lovely assistant has got her camera on too. So the irregular patterns, basically, they don't look like where the spots should be on the dice or the domino. So it's the same idea, but they look slightly different. And again, it's just starting with that discussion. So, Maria, what do you see and how do you see it?
I see 4 and I see a 2 and another set of 2.
I don't know. When Maria first looked at that, I noticed that she went, 1, 2, 3, 4 in her head. So really, she's not seeing that perceptually as 3 because she counted from 1. So I think having watched Maria do that, I would probably need to go back to do a little bit more work on perceptual recognition with her, because she's not seeing that yet as 3 by itself. She's counting in ones. So again, that's an indication of maybe something that I would do with Maria. But she saw 3 and 1. I might ask somebody else, they saw 2 and 2. So again, just using different arrangements to have that discussion. You know, what do you see and how do you see it? You're then wanting to build it up where they're able to see patterns growing. So they can see it as 1, they can see it as 2, they can see it as 3, and how that looks when these numbers build up. And then it should get to a point where I can just randomly show very quickly, and Maria would be able to tell me that there was 4, that there was 2. And you can see that on these cards, you know, the 3 looks different. They're in different positioning on lots of different cards. Lots of nice things that you can use these for. I've seen people using them as snap. So they have the irregular dots, but they also then add in the regular ones, the ones how they should look, and they can play snap with them. Obviously that would not be a snap, but you get the idea. Or you play games like pairs and things like that with them. I also saw a really nice activity in one of the settings last week that I was chatting to, where the children had, there was bits of paper that had random dot patterns on them. The children were able to pick one, and then they made a picture out of what they had. So somebody had used 2 eyes, and that was a person, and they were eating, I think it was 3 or 4 cookies that were going into the person's mouth. And again, just really nice to see how they were seeing these different patterns. So lots and lots of different ways that you can begin to embed that, again, beyond flashcards, so that it's actually making it relevant for the children.
And I suppose it's worth saying there, Yvonne, that what you noticed with me is really important. So watching that body language, because what we'll find when we start to introduce the irregular patterns is that they might be a bit more hesitant. The learners might be a bit more hesitant, or they might just say they don't know. They'll be a wee bit more confused. They'll take a wee bit longer. So if I was reciting when we were doing the regular patterns, I see 1, 2, 3, 4, or I see 6, 5, 3, and I was doing that quite confidently and quite quickly, I won't necessarily have that same level of confidence when I'm showing the irregular patterns. So it's good to watch out for that in terms of, are they counting silently? Do you see their fingers? Almost are hiding their fingers at times under tables or under, because they don't want to show their fingers. But is there that bit of hesitance or lack of confidence when they're showing those irregular dot patterns? And if that's the case, we just need to do more and more of, you know, that practice and use the opportunities every day to try and develop that. Sorry, Yvonne.
Not at all, not at all. Just some of the other things that we've kind of seen and heard people talking about. So things like the child might roll a dice, and then they have to find a random dot card that matches that pattern. They might do things where they're rolling the dice and then they have to arrange their counters in a random pattern that matches what's on the dice. I've seen people having kind of things available for printing and stamping so that children can make their own random dot pictures. I know certainly as myself, I used to have drawers full of those tiny little dot stickers and never really know what to do with them. Again, a great way of allowing children to kind of just have a play and experience, you know, random arrangements of dots and see what they come up with. When we are talking about that conceptual Subatising, we are essentially taking children beyond number bonds. So when we talk about number bonds, it's the 2 numbers that go together to make that total. So essentially it's splitting one number into 2 parts. So here you can see all the different ways to make 6. So I've got a 1 and a 5, a 2 and a 4, a 3 and a 3. But what Subatising conceptually does is that it encourages children to look for lots of different amounts within the total. So you can see here, some children will see 1 and 1 and 1 and 1 and 1 and 1. Some people will see 3 and 1 and 2. So it goes much more beyond just splitting a number into 2 amounts. And we really want to make sure that we are encouraging children to develop this, because essentially if they don't have that, they're missing a big gap when it comes on to things like addition and subtraction. Again, as Maria said, once you start to notice Subatising in the world around you, you'll find it really difficult to not notice it. There is a mathematician on Twitter who shares images every couple of days, and it just is that, you know, what do you see? How do you see it? So lots of different examples that you can use, and we'd encourage you following his Twitter just because it gives you access to some interesting images. And also great to encourage children to create their own. So for example, if you gave everybody 7 things, how can they arrange them? Can they all arrange them in different layouts so that you've got different ways that 7 can look? And you'll notice that one of your homework activities is actually beginning to think about how could you collate some Subatising images that could maybe be used in different ways across your setting. Maria, I think we've spoken for quite a while, so shall we stop and give a 5-minute screen break and come back at 5 o'clock?
Sounds perfect. Yep.
So that way people can get up and have a stretch, and
Yep.
we will see people back at 5.
Bit of a break there for 5 minutes. Just before I pass back to Yvonne, I just wanted to pick up on a comment that was in the chat, and I think it was Susie Scott. So Susie, thank you for your question. You were asking about some templates, and I think a few people answered. But what I wanted to do was just come in and quickly post into the chat a website that I found really, really helpful, and I've put it on the Padlet too. But if you're not already familiar with it, there's a really good website, and it's called IC Maths, and there's a whole host of stuff on there. But what I've done is that I've just posted a link to the early numeracy section, and what you'll get there is lots of templates and lots of printables of regular, irregular patterns, and that can be either in dot patterns or finger patterns. There's tally marks there. So if you were looking for a sort of go-to place, it's all free. I would highly recommend the IC Maths website, which is great. Obviously, you can use other things as well, but if you were looking for those templates that Yvonne was sharing, that's a good place to start. So, sorry, Yvonne, I will pass back over to you. I just thought I would pick up on that while I had the opportunity. I've also added it to the Padlet, as I was saying. So,
Thank you.
over to you.
Thank you very much. Okay, and actually, Maria, don't go anywhere because I need you for the next bit. So, as we were speaking about, and people were asking about the Padlet, we'll post that in the chat, and you'll get it emailed out to you as well. As we were saying, that multi-sensory approach to Subatising is something that you want to keep building as you begin to think about the conceptual Subatising as well. Lots of different ways that you can build on this. So it might be things like having a sequence of movements and copying them. So Maria, I'm going to chop my hands. I want you to copy and tell me how many chops I did.
Three.
Okay, and again, you know, I'm a lover of puppets. You can take me out of early years, but you'll never take it out the girl. You know, my puppet, he might count. So Maria, I wonder if you can watch him counting and tell me how many he counted.
I think that was 4.
Okay, doke. So again, just different ways that you can get children thinking about that without necessarily having that visual to be able to see. The other thing that you might do is begin to introduce the likes of musical instruments or body percussion, clapping, stamping, tapping. And again, Maria and I have found out that for some reason you cannot hear musical instruments over Teams. We don't know if it's just us but certainly we don't seem to hear any. But when you're using these with children, it's that experience of playing a pattern and then getting them to copy. So Maria, this is extra tricky for you because you can't actually hear it, so you'll just have to watch me. See if you can copy this back by clapping it back?
That was trickier, but I'll try.
And you can see that at first I was just very monotone, just keeping it in a very simple, steady beat. As children begin to see that 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, I can then begin to think about different sequences of sounds. So again, Maria, apologies because you can't actually hear me tinging my triangle, but see if you can clap this one back to me.
Oh, that was quite testing that time, but it is about that development. So
Good job. And when you were clapping that back to me, Maria, what did you see in your head when you were doing it? I'll play it again and you can think about what did you see when you were clapping?
I saw 2 and 3.
And how many claps did you do altogether?
I did 5 claps.
So again, just lots of different ways that you can build these things in, yep, as somebody said, estimation. So you're kind of tinging or clapping or stamping. You're asking them how many did they think, and then can they actually test it out to work out how many there is altogether. And another thing that is important is also to be building in finger patterns. This is something that, again, we love to see children using finger patterns. It's such an important part of their mathematical development. So please, as Maria was saying, if you see children hiding their fingers under the table or kind of sitting on them and not wanting to show you, please do encourage them to show their fingers, let people see what they're doing. So with finger patterns, again, there's different stages of kind of mathematical development and stages of using finger patterns. We've tried to go with the most sort of common terms. Again, you know, if you're following particular schemes of work or particular resources, you might see these referred to in different ways. But essentially, they all kind of lead to the same thing. So we have grow me and throw me. So grow me is when a child is still at that stage of needing to count from 1. So if I was to say to Maria, can you show me on your fingers, show me 5. So you can see that at that stage, Maria was very much still counting from 1 to be able to get to the 5. If I was to say to Maria, throw me 5, you can see that she didn't have to start at 1. She was able to just remember that that was 5. And again, lots of different ways that you can build these into different games, to activities, if you're along in the hall, loads of different ways that you can build these in. The other thing that we can do with fingers is to show a number in different ways. So I might say to Maria, can you show me 5 using 2 hands? Okay, so Maria shows me 3 and 2. Now, Maria, you jumped a step ahead there. You know what's coming.
I'm showing off.
I might say to you, Maria, so you've shown me 3 and 2. Can you show me 5 in a different way? So this time Maria showed me 4 and 1. And again, just modelling back and using that language. So Maria's maybe not able to describe what she's done, but I can see that Maria has shown 4 and 1, 5 altogether. A very common response when you first say to children, can you show me 5 and use 2 hands? They'll do that. And again, it's that discussion. Well, have we got 5? Let's see. Is this 5? Well, actually, that's 10, and kind of exploring the misconceptions with them. Once children are really confident in showing you different numbers, so they can show you 8, they can show it in different ways, you then might have heard of people using what we call bunny ears. And this is where it basically becomes an unseen amount. So they're not able to actually look and check. So this is where children are encouraged to put their hands above their head so they can't actually see it. I also had one class who used to complain that their arms got heavy, so we used to do bunny tails and show the bunny's tail. But Maria, if I ask you to put your bunny ears up for me, can you show me 7? Can you show me 7 in a different way? Okay, I can see you've got 4 and 3. And this time, I'd like everybody to join in. Hopefully you're not on the bus travelling home or anything like that. But if you put your bunny ears up, can you show me 8? Can you show me 8, but made in a different way? And you can see, even as adults, I'm thinking I've definitely got a 3, I'm trying to check. It is difficult because we've not been taught in that way. But just, again, a really good way of helping children to think about what this means and how many there is altogether. You can also use your fingers for doubles patterns. So show me double 1, show me double 4, show me double 5. Again, just such an easy way to keep track of things. Maria, I'm going to use you for one last thing, and then you'll be glad to know you can turn your camera off.
I'm
This
exhausted.
time, we're going to do some counting, and I'd like you to keep track on your fingers of how many Percy counts. Okay, are you ready, Percy? Are you ready, Maria?
I'm ready.
Okay. Okay, I'm going to do another one, so put your fingers back to 0 and make sure we can see them. Okay, you ready, Percy? Going to make a tricky one for Maria. Okay, so again, it might be as you're counting, the children are tracking on their fingers how many they see. And again, you can do that in lots of different ways, with the tinging, with the clapping. Again, just using their fingers to keep track of what they hear. And that, again, is just another way of encouraging them to become familiar with finger patterns. Thank you, Maria. You can go for a lie down now. The other thing that you might begin to use, and this just helps to kind of help learners and help children to see the pattern of number, is to begin to use different number frames. So you can see here we've got 5 frames. This is generally what we would encourage you to start with. And right at the beginning, it's just about focusing on them being full and empty. So when you first start to introduce number frames, you're not talking about the quantity of dots or anything like that. It's just about making sure that children recognise that it fills up from one side or from the other side, and what it looks like when it's full and empty. And a lot of settings will use these in familiar ways. So you might use it for registration around who is in the setting, or once they've had the likes of snack, they go up and put their picture up to show that they've had it. And again, it's that kind of, you can see almost the excitement of, oh, once it's getting full, there's just one more person's picture to go on. The other thing that's really important when you're using number frames is that you show them in lots of different orientations. So you're not always just showing them horizontally, but actually we want children to understand that this was 5, this was 5, depending on what it looks like. And then once children are familiar with 5 frames, it is then introducing them to 10 frames. So again, once children are familiar with 5 frames, they'll begin to recognise that 2 full 5 frames make 10 altogether. There's 2 types of 5 frames. So we get a 5 pattern, or 5 Ys, where it begins to build up along the line of the 5 first. And you also get them in a pairs pattern, or pairs Ys. And this is where it loads, it begins to build up along the pair. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So you can see on this screen here, these are both examples of 6 shown on a 10 frame. And we want children to have experience of seeing 10 frames with both types of patterns on them. And again, lots of activities that you can use where these are together. Things like snap, things like pairs, different matching activities that can be used. So we would like to ask you, where do you have number frames in your setting? Because I know people loved to hear what other people were up to. So where do you use number frames across your setting? People saying they've got them for self-registration, registration for snack at the loose parts area. We use it as a calendar, outdoors, snack cards, wooden ones for outside, Play-Doh, fine motor with pom-poms. Outdoor treasure sorting. Great, so lots of ideas coming into the chat there, which is great to see. And just kind of on the note of kind of making sure that you've got number frames available, we spoke last time about the importance of songs and rhymes. We know that loads of settings have lovely song props that they use that really help to bring these songs and rhymes to life. And what we'd like you to do as one of your activities is just to consider, are there places that you could add in number frames which help to scaffold the Subatising a little bit? So for example, if you've got song bags that go home, or you've got song bags that people can access throughout the day if they want to sing some songs, could you put in a 10 frame if it's the likes of 10 in the bed, or a 5 frame if it's 5 current buns? So again, these could be used as ways of scaffolding. And I'm going to hand you over to Maria, who's going to just go through the last couple of slides before we finish.
Thank you, Yvonne. There seems to be some comments in the chat saying the presentation, the email that went out said 4 to 5, so huge apologies that there's been a bit of a misunderstanding. So with that in mind, I'll go through the next few slides quite quickly, but each session from now on will be starting at 4 and will run on to 5:30, so apologies that there's been a bit of a misunderstanding there. The next few slides are just going to pick on a couple of things that Yvonne and I have mentioned already, and it's really about the importance of Subatising and how teaching Subatising effectively can start to enhance other understanding across different language and different numeracy and maths concepts. So in this example here, Yvonne had a similar slide earlier. It's really just about having that pattern of 4, asking those questions about what you see and how you see them, but simply moving the arrangement or getting the learners themselves, the children themselves, to move the arrangements, you can start to see that it doesn't actually matter what the arrangement looks like and how the objects are grouped. We still have 4. So what we're developing by doing an activity like that is that conservation of number, that it doesn't matter the arrangement. We can also start to develop their understanding of, the composition of numbers, that 4 can be a 1, a 1, a 1 and a 1. It can be a 2 and a 2. It can be a 3 and a 1. So it's really about thinking about that part-whole awareness that Yvonne mentioned earlier on, and how numbers and the different ways that numbers are made up. What we're thinking is that this can lead into that early idea of addition and subtraction. And again, you can see all the different options that are listed there. Yvonne mentioned it earlier on. The arrangements that we've put in there show the different ways that you can use the equal sign. That's a session for another day. It's another one of my gripes, I suppose, is about the way we always see the equal sign as being at the end, but actually it's just about exploring different ways that the equal sign can be presented to show that idea of equality. But again, as I said, that's a session for another day. The next slide will show this is one that I did, and that's the reason that we put it in there, is using Subatising plates. So it's just about the same idea, but how many different ways can we, do activities to explain the understanding behind Subatising. The children will think it's something completely different they're learning, but we know in our head it's just about that idea of regular and or irregular patterns. So it's again, what do you see? How do you see them? What I would be doing is I would be having a whole set of regular patterns, 1 to 6, and another set of irregular patterns showing 1 to 6, just so that we can mix and match. But it's a kind of good, fun and easy way to develop that idea of Subatising, but also allows us to introduce and extend other mathematical language. some of which our learners will typically find quite difficult. So again, we can be thinking about introducing the regular patterns and then start to extend by bringing in those irregular patterns as well, but really noticing how the learners respond and asking them questions like what is the same and what is different. So we're really probing them here to think about it much more deeply. We might want to use the plates to bring in that idea of comparison. So we're thinking about which plate shows more or less, and again it's that focus on more and less. We sometimes see that we focus a lot on which plate shows more, but it's bringing in that idea of also thinking about which plate shows less counters. And these visual approaches can be really, really helpful for learners. We might want to focus on one plate in particular, and we might want to ask learners things like which number comes before what you see, which number comes after, and if they're saying the number that comes before the pattern of 4 is 3, ask the learners to make a pattern of 3 and see how many different ways they can make that pattern of 3. Or if we're showing them a pattern of 5 and asking the number that comes after, how many different patterns showing 6 can they come up with? It really is a good indicator for us about what the learners know. Again, we can use 2 or more plates to develop the understanding of number bonds and those totals. And we can ask questions like how many more to total 10, how many more or less to equal a particular number. So you can see all that mathematical language is being exposed here through this one Subatising activity. So definitely worth thinking about Subatising plates. I know my learners had lots and lots of fun with them, and there's so much you can do with them. The next slide, and I apologise, I'm going through these quite quickly, but I am just aware of time. The idea of more, less and equal is really important. And again, through experience, some learners find this quite tricky. So it's about thinking about visual ways that we can use to promote that idea of more, less or equal. Not focusing particularly on counting, but just maybe thinking at first, which group has more, which has less, and again, that balance between more and less. I would also be thinking about asking our learners to justify their answers and ask them a wee bit more so that they can explain their thinking. Really good skills to start to develop in our learners as early as we possibly can. And again, focus on less than. I've said it a few times, but it's about thinking later on. Does this lead to greater understanding of things like subtraction, division and fractions, which we know traditionally learners find quite difficult? The next slide talks really about those building blocks, and we've mentioned it a few times, but using Subatising as those building blocks, excuse me, for example, addition and subtraction, and using those 10 frames as much as we can so that learners really see that pattern of one 10 frame equating to 10 and another 10 frame, in this case showing 4, but we're able to then get the learners to see those patterns and see beyond the one 10 frame. We know that place value can be a bit of a tricky concept for learners to understand, but if we've got lots of those visual approaches there where they can see 14, but they can visualise it as one set of 10 and 4 more, we're getting away from that fact that they sometimes see a 1 in the number 14 and associate it with 1 and not necessarily a group of 10, which is what we need to do. So again, those familiar dot patterns that you see at the bottom there can also provide that useful visual to help children keep track as they're beginning to count in multiples. So they're seeing that pattern, repeated pattern of 5, they see 4 lots of 5, how many altogether? We see 20. So it's that they're skip counting and the counting in multiples that we're talking about there. And we can pick up on some of this in the next session because I know I'm going through it fairly quickly. But just a bit of a summary. Today what we were hoping, Yvonne and I were hoping, is that you come away with the understanding that Subatising is so much more than just simply recognising those dice patterns. We want our children to be able to see, to hear and to feel what numbers feel like. So it really is adopting that multisensory and that very holistic approach. We want our learners to develop that understanding of how numbers are made up, how they can be taken apart and recombined, and how to recognise this in familiar and unfamiliar patterns and have that flexibility. That really is important. It's about that flexibility with numbers. The last slide, as far as the session goes tonight, is We want also to think back to what we covered in session 1. So for those of you who were able to join us for session 1, we're thinking about that wider environment and really immersing our learners in, for example, the number 5. And Subatising is one way of children developing number sense, but it's important that we continue to encourage them to recognise numerals, to spot them when they're out and about in their environment. But the most important part is to recognise the importance of numbers in their lives. So we really want them to see that relevance and to be seeing it everywhere that they go. I know Yvonne and I have over the last few weeks when we were putting this together. So in terms of Subatising, that's the session for tonight. The next few slides are just really reminding you what's to come. So I've just posted in the chat pane the Padlet again, and a reminder that the tonight's session, the recording and the slides will be made available to you very shortly, and that you can access that through the link that I've just posted into the chat. And the very last thing that I want to talk to you about is really the takeaway task. So what we're trying to do each session is give you something to take away, something that you can then begin to have conversations with, either on your own or with your staff. So we've deliberately made it quite open-ended. What we're hoping that you'll do is think about, doing a bit of an audit of your environment. You might start noticing things, and you might want to spend time noticing with your learners. Think about those images that Yvonne shared with you earlier on, and you might want to go away and just use this in your own way. So you might want to take one thing and develop it for yourself as a bit of professional learning. Alternatively, and there's no hard and fast rules about how you do this, but you might want to take one or two of the options on the slide just now and develop that as part of a staff team, a bit of professional learning for your team. So go on a bit of a learning walk and consider and discuss the opportunities that you have within your own setting, indoors and out, to develop the idea of Subatising. What changes might you want to make? What might you want to add to make sure that we're really doing that very explicitly? You could think about that option 3 there about collecting your own images, and you could work together to gather some images, but think about how you'll store them, how you'll share them, so that you make those images accessible across your staff team. So there's lots there that we hope you'll be able to pick from to go away and start thinking about between this session and the next session, which leads us nicely onto the last slide. A reminder that the next session is the 27th of March. It's between 4 and 5:30, and that we will focus much more on the counting principles. I mentioned them a little bit earlier on, but we want to focus much more on the counting principles and provide you with some practical ways that you could develop the understanding of the counting principles across your own setting. So we've got just a couple of minutes spare. We managed to rattle through those last few slides there. Thank you to all of you for coming along, and indeed your lovely comments in the chat pane. Hopefully that's been lots of ideas for you to take away and ponder over. And please, between now and the next session, think about sharing some of your light bulb moments or your wonderings or your noticings with us at the beginning of session number 3. So a big thank you from me, and hope to see you all at session 3 on the 27th of March.